Chapter 1. The blood moon summons the carriage. Wheels had stopped turning an hour ago. Alara pressed her palm against the frosted window, her breath fogging the glass as she peered into the skeletal forest beyond. The driver had abandoned them without explanation, disappearing into the trees with nothing but a muttered prayer and the jingle of harness bells fading into silence. Her companion, Lady Pemberton's maid, had followed soon after, leaving Alara alone with her trunk and the growing certainty that she had made a terrible mistake. She should never have accepted the position. A governess post in the Northern Territories, they'd said. Good wages, respectable family, isolated estate. What they hadn't mentioned was that the roads this far north belonged to something other than the crown. The moon hung bloated and rust-colored above the pines, casting everything in shades of dried blood. A blood moon. Her grandmother would have called it an omen, would have locked the doors and shuttered the windows and burned sage until morning. But Alara's grandmother was 3 years dead, and Alara had stopped believing in omens the night her betrothed had publicly renounced their engagement and married her closest friend instead. Some wounds cut deeper than superstition could reach. She gathered her cloak tighter and stepped down from the carriage, her boots crunching on frost-hardened ground. The forest pressed close on all sides, ancient oaks twisted into tortured shapes, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, or something that wanted her to believe it was a wolf. The cold bit through her traveling dress, and Alara realized with creeping dread that she would freeze if she stayed here. The nearest village was 15 miles back, impossible to reach on foot in darkness. Forward then. The estate couldn't be more than a few miles ahead. If the driver's hastily abandoned map could be trusted, she had taken perhaps 20 steps when she heard it, the sharp crack of a branch. Too deliberate to be wind, Alara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The forest had gone utterly silent. No wind, no animals, nothing but the thunderous rush of blood in her ears. You shouldn't be here. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, velvet smooth and laced with something that made her skin prickle. Alara spun, searching the shadows, but saw nothing except the skeletal trees and that bleeding moon. Show yourself, she demanded, hating how her voice trembled. A figure materialized from the darkness as though the night itself had taken form. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in black that seemed to absorb what little light the moon provided. His face was carved from marble, severe, beautiful, inhuman. Eyes like winter storms fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The roads are closed after sunset, he said, each word precise and cold. By order of House Corvin. House Corvin. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it like a decree, like law, made her pulse quicken. I'm traveling to the Ashford estate, Alara managed, forcing steel into her spine. I'm expected. I have papers. Your papers mean nothing here. He moved closer, and she realized he made no sound when he walked. No crunch of frost, no rustle of fabric. This territory belongs to the night courts now. Human law ended at the village gates. Night courts. The words slithered through her mind, dredging up half-remembered warnings from childhood, stories of creatures that fed on blood, of ancient houses that ruled from shadow, of laws older than kingdoms. Fairy tales meant to frighten children, except the man before her wasn't a fairy tale. He was real and terrifying, and looking at her like she was something fragile that might break. I don't understand, Alara whispered. You're in danger. His gaze flicked past her, toward the carriage, and something shifted in his expression. Alarm. Perhaps, or calculation. They're already hunting. I can smell the tracking hounds on the wind. Who's hunting? I don't. The forest exploded with sound. They came from all sides, moving with unnatural speed, shapes that had been trees suddenly resolving into figures dressed in crimson and gold, their eyes reflecting moonlight like animals. 6 of them, maybe more, spreading out to surround her. The man in black moved between Alara and the newcomers, his posture shifting from merely imposing to genuinely threatening. She's under my protection. One of the red-clad figures laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Your protection means nothing, Corvin. The girl crossed into House Valyrian territory. She's ours by right of trespass. She's human. Ignorant of our laws. Ignorance is not innocence. The speaker stepped forward, and Alara saw her clearly now, a woman with copper hair and a smile that promised cruelty. The penalty for trespass is blood debt, 3 nights of service, or her life. House law is absolute. Alara's mind reeled. Blood debt, service. This couldn't be real. couldn't be happening, but the cold was real. And the fear clawing up her throat was real. And the man standing between her and those terrible smiling faces was very, very real. I invoke sanctuary right, the man Corvin said quietly. She shelters with House Corvin until the matter is settled before the Night Council. The woman's smile curdled. You would risk war over a human girl? I would risk war over law. His voice dropped lower, and Alara felt something dark and vast unfurl in the space around him, like standing at the edge of an abyss. Unless House Valerian wishes to argue precedent, silence stretched thin and deadly. Then the woman hissed something in a language Alara didn't recognize, and the red-clad figures melted back into shadow. When they were gone, Corvin turned to face her. Up close, his inhumanity was even more apparent. Skin to pale, features too perfect, eyes that held centuries of winter. Come, he said. My estate is near. You'll be safe there. Safe? Alara's laugh bordered on hysteria. You're one of them. You're a vampire. He finished calmly. Yes. And you, Miss Thorne? Alara Thorne. Miss Thorne, you have approximately 3 minutes before House Valerian decides sanctuary law is worth breaking. He extended one gloved hand. Choice is a luxury you no longer possess. Alara stared at that offered hand, pale leather against darker night, and thought of the carriage driver's fear. Her maid's desertion. The wolves that weren't wolves. Thought of the copper-haired woman's promised cruelty. She took his hand. His grip was iron cold and utterly steady. And when he pulled her forward into the forest's embrace, Alara Thorne left her old life behind in the frost. Chapter 2. The Corvin Estatith forest gave way to stone. Alara stumbled as they crossed an invisible threshold, and suddenly the oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by moonlight that seemed almost warm. Before them rose a manor that belonged in a different age, all Gothic arches and iron-traced windows, turrets clawing at the sky like talons. Ivy consumed the western wall, and gargoyles perched along the roofline, their expressions frozen in eternal screams. Corvin's grip on her hand never loosened, even as they climbed the marble steps. The massive oak doors swung open before he touched them, revealing an entrance hall lit by hundreds of candles. Their flames burned impossibly still, without flicker or smoke. How Alara began. Questions later, he released her hand, and she immediately felt the absence of that cold steadiness. First, we need to establish the sanctuary bond. House Valerian will be watching for any sign of weakness. He moved through the hall with the fluid grace of a predator, and Alara found herself following, taking in details that her overwhelmed mind struggled to process. Portraits lined the walls, aristocrats in clothing spanning centuries, all sharing Corvin's severe beauty. The floor was black marble veined with silver, reflecting the candlelight like stars. Everything was perfectly preserved, as though time itself dared not touch this place. Corvin led her to a library that smelled of old leather and older secrets. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned with ancient volumes, and a fire burned in a hearth large enough to stand in. He gestured to a velvet chair near the flames. Sit, you're freezing. Only when he said it did Alara realize she was shaking. She sank into the chair, holding her hands toward the fire, and watched as Corvin moved to a sideboard and poured amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. Brandy, he said, offering her one. It will help with the shock. I don't drink spirits. Tonight you do. His tone brooked no argument. Alara took the glass and sipped, gasping as warmth scorched down her throat. Corvin didn't drink from his own glass. He simply held it, watching her with those winter storm eyes. Sanctuary right, Alara said, her voice steadier now. What does that mean exactly? It means you're under my protection until the Night Council convenes to hear your case. He set his glass down and touched. You'll shelter here, in House Corvin territory. House Valerian cannot touch you without declaring open war, and if the council rules against me, then you'll face blood debt regardless. He moved to stand before the fire, his profile sharp as cut glass. But I will argue your case. Humans are not subject to our trespass laws. There's precedent from the Treaty of Shadows. 1547. House Valerian is overreaching. The way he spoke of 1547 as though it were recent made her head spin. How old are you? Old enough to remember when these territories were kingdoms, not merely hunting grounds. He turned to face her fully. But age is irrelevant. What matters is that you understand your situation. You're caught between 2 great houses in a power struggle that predates your grandmother's grandmother. I don't understand any of this. Alara set the brandy aside, her hands curling into fists. Yesterday I was traveling to a governess position. Today I'm apparently property being fought over by vampires who speak of blood debt and sanctuary like it's law. It is law. The only law that matters here. Corvin's expression softened fractionally, though it was like watching ice consider melting. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to stay calm and trust that I will protect you. Trust you? I don't even know you. You know I stood between you and House Valerian. You know, I invoked a right that could cost me considerable political capital. He took a step closer, and Alara was struck again by his unnatural stillness, no breathing, no fidgeting, nothing human. You know I brought you to my home rather than leaving you to freeze or be taken. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why would you risk anything for a stranger? Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or pain so old it had calcified into stone. Because you reminded me of someone who also believed omens were merely superstition, who also walked into danger with her chin raised and her fear locked behind her teeth, past tense. Someone who was gone. Before Alara could respond, a door at the far end of the library opened, and a woman entered. She was small, dark-haired, and moved with the same inhuman grace as Corvin. Her eyes silver like moonlight took in Alara with cool assessment. So this is the girl causing such excitement, she said, her accent carrying notes of something Eastern European. House Valerian has already sent 3 messengers demanding her return. They're claiming the sanctuary invocation was improperly witnessed. It was properly witnessed by the moon and the forest. Corvin's voice hardened. Ancient law requires no other witness. Ancient law is subject to interpretation, dear brother. The woman moved closer, circling Alara's chair like a cat examining prey. And you know how the council loves to argue interpretation. We could be tied up in deliberations for months, brother. So this was family, or whatever vampires called family. Months? Alara's voice cracked. I can't stay here for months. I have a position waiting. You have nothing waiting but questions about why you never arrived. The woman's smile was sharp. By now, every human settlement from here to the capital knows to fear the northern roads after dark. Your employers will assume you were lost to wolves or bandits. No one will come looking. The words hit like physical blows. No one will come looking. Because no one had been looking before, either not after the scandal, not after her betrothed's very public betrayal. She'd been invisible in London, a ghost haunting her own life. At least here, she was seen, even if what saw her was dangerous. Corvin shot his sister a warning. Look, Isolde, you're frightening her. I'm preparing her. Isolde perched on the arm of Alara's chair, close enough that Alara could see the absolute absence of breath, of pulse, of life. She needs to understand what she's walked into. This isn't a gothic romance, girl. This is war. Chapter 3. The habits of Immortal. Alara woke to absolute darkness. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, then memory crashed back in waves. The forest. The vampires. Corvin's cold hand pulling her into sanctuary. She sat up in the massive four-poster bed, her heart hammering, and fumbled for the candle she remembered seeing on the nightstand. Her fingers found the brass holder, but the candle was already lit, burning with that same unnatural stillness as the ones in the entrance hall. You'll find the candles in this house never burn down. Corvin's voice came from the shadows near the window. One of the small magics woven into the estate. They'll extinguish only when you wish them to. Alara clutched the bed sheets to her chest, heat flooding her cheeks. She was still fully dressed. She'd been too exhausted and overwhelmed to even consider undressing, but his presence in her bedroom felt intensely intimate. How long have you been standing there? Since you cried out in your sleep. He moved into the candlelight, and she saw he wore the same black clothing from earlier, not a thread out of place. You were dreaming of London, of someone named Thomas. Her former betrothed's name on his lips made her flinch. You can read minds? I can hear fear. It has a particular sound, faster heartbeat, shortened breath, the small noises people make when they're trying not to weep. His expression remained neutral, but something in his tone suggested he'd heard those sounds often. I came to ensure you were safe. The nightmares of the newly sanctuary bound can sometimes attract unwanted attention. From what? Things that feed on fear rather than blood. He moved to the fireplace, which had burned down to embers, and with a gesture that looked like nothing at all, the flames surged back to life. This house is warded against them, but it's better to be cautious. Alara watched him, noting the small impossibilities. No breath misting in the cold air, No shadow cast despite standing directly in the firelight. The way he moved without sound, without weight, as though gravity itself wasn't certain how to hold him. "Do you sleep?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish. Of course, he didn't sleep. Not like humans did, but Corvin nodded. During daylight hours. The sun doesn't destroy us, that's mythology, but it drains us, makes us vulnerable. So we rest when it rises, and wake when it sets. He turned from the fire to face her. "You'll need to adjust your schedule accordingly if you're to move through this house safely." "Safely? Am I in danger here?" "Not from me or mine. But a vampire household operates under different rules than you're accustomed to." He moved to a chair near her bed and sat with careful deliberation, as though remembering that humans found standing vigils unsettling. "There are servants here, human servants who've chosen to serve House Corvin in exchange for protection and considerable wages. They know our nature, and have signed contracts accordingly. But there are also vampires who've sworn allegiance to my house, and not all of them have my restraint." The implication sent ice down her spine. "Restraint regarding what?" "Your blood." His gaze held hers, unflinching. "You're human, Miss Thorne. To my kind, you're tempting." The younger vampires especially may struggle with proximity to an unbound human. Unbound. Not claimed by any house. Not marked as under specific protection. He leaned back slightly, and the firelight caught the sharp planes of his face. "The sanctuary right offers legal protection, but it doesn't mask your scent or suppress the instinct to feed. You'll need to be careful. Stay in the east wing where I can monitor who approaches. Don't wander the grounds after midnight. And never, under any circumstances, invite a vampire to feed from you. I would never, not even if they seem friendly. Not even if they claim it's harmless." His voice took on an edge. "Feeding creates a bond. The vampire gains access to your memories, your emotions, even your dreams. It's an intimacy beyond what most humans can comprehend, and it cannot be undone." Alara pulled the blankets tighter, suddenly aware of the pulse in her throat, the blood moving through her veins. "Have you ever fed from a human?" "Yes." No hesitation, no shame. "When necessary, with consent, and always with contracts that ensure fair compensation and protection. I don't hunt. I don't take by force. But I am what I am, Miss Thorne." Denying it would be dishonest. She should be terrified. Should be planning escape. Should be screaming for help, except help didn't exist here. And something in his brutal honesty felt safer than any comforting lie could be. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Why warn me away from your own kind?" "Because you need to survive the next few months, and survival requires understanding the danger." He stood, moving back toward the door. "Also because I suspect you've spent considerable time recently around people who lied to you with smiles. I won't be one of them." The observation struck too close. Thomas had smiled when he'd broken their engagement. Had smiled while explaining that Alara simply wasn't suitable, wasn't charming enough, wasn't enough. Her friend Margaret had smiled too, right up until the wedding announcement. "You said I reminded you of someone," Alara said quietly. "Who is she?" Corvin paused at the threshold, his hand on the doorframe. "My sister. Not Isolde, she's my bloodkin. I mean my turned sister, Lisette. She was human once, until she wasn't." His shoulders tensed. She believed in honesty, too. It got her killed by vampires who preferred pretty lies. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Just be careful." He opened the door, then glanced back. "There's a bell pulled by the bed. Ring it if you need anything. The servants will come, and they'll fetch me if necessary. Will you come? If I ring?" The question hung between them, heavier than she'd intended. Corvin's expression shifted, something almost vulnerable flickering across his marble features. "Yes," he said simply. "I would come." Then he was gone, the door closing with a soft click, leaving Alara alone with the undying candles and the uncomfortable realization that the most dangerous creature in this house might also be the only one she could trust. Chapter 4. Threads of Truth. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Alara learned the rhythms of House Corvin, the way the household stirred at dusk, how the servants moved through the halls with quiet efficiency during the daylight hours when their vampire masters slept. She learned which corridors were safe and which were forbidden, marked by silver symbols etched into the doorframes that seemed to pulse with faint light. She learned that Isolde enjoyed tormenting her with casual mentions of blood, debts, and council politics, but would also leave books on Alara's nightstand, Gothic novels, and poetry collections, as though she understood the need for escape. She learned that the human servants were paid better than most London governesses and seemed genuinely content, though they all bore small scars on their wrists from consensual feedings, and she learned that Corvin was everywhere and nowhere at once. He appeared at odd hours in the library when she was reading, in the conservatory when she needed air, always maintaining careful distance, but watching her with those winter eyes as though memorizing every detail. He never touched her after that first night in the forest, never came too close. But his presence had become a constant weight she couldn't shake. On the fourth evening, she found him in the portrait gallery. He stood before a massive painting of a young woman with dark hair and defiant eyes, wearing a gown from at least 2 centuries past. The resemblance to the earlier description was unmistakable. "Lisette," Alara said quietly, not wanting to startle him though she suspected nothing truly startled a vampire. "Yes." He didn't turn. "Painted in 1804, 3 years after I turned her. She was 23. A governess, actually, fleeing a scandal not unlike yours." Alara moved closer, studying the portrait. Lisette's painted eyes held the same fierce intelligence she saw in her own mirror, the look of someone who'd learned to armor themselves against the world. What happened to her? House Valerian happened. Now he did turn, and the grief in his expression was so raw it made her chest ache. They claimed she'd violated feeding protocols, that she'd taken blood without proper consent. It was a lie. Lisette would never, but the council ruled against her. The penalty for such violations is death by sunlight exposure. They killed her for something she didn't do? They killed her to weaken me. His hands clenched at his sides. I'd opposed House Valerian's expansion into human territories, argued for stronger protections for mortal servants. Lisette's execution was their answer. A reminder that even those we protect can be taken if we challenge the wrong people. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. "That's why you invoked sanctuary for me. House Valerian was going to use you the same way." "Yes." He met her gaze directly. "You were a weapon they'd stumbled upon, Miss Thorne. A way to force my hand, to make me choose between protecting an innocent and avoiding another costly political battle. When I invoked sanctuary, I chose both." Alara's throat tightened. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you've been betrayed by people who claim to care for you. I know you traveled alone to an isolated position rather than stay where that betrayal could keep wounding you." His voice softened fractionally. "I know you have nightmares about a man named Thomas who made you feel small. And I know that when faced with monsters in a forest, you raised your chin and demanded they show themselves, rather than cowering." Heat crept up her neck. "You make me sound braver than I am. I make you sound exactly as brave as you are." He turned back to Lisette's portrait. "She was like that too. Frightened but fighting. It's a rare quality, Miss Thorne. Most people choose one or the other." They stood in silence, the weight of shared grief settling between them like a bridge. Alara thought of Thomas, of Margaret, of all the people who'd smiled while cutting her loose. Thought of how she'd been invisible in her own life. A ghost in drawing rooms and ballrooms, always too much or not enough. Here, in this impossible house, full of immortal predators, she was seen. "Tell me about Thomas," Corvin said quietly. "The nightmare that brought me to your room. Why do you want to know?" "Because pain recognized is pain halved. And because I suspect you haven't spoken of it to anyone who actually listened." The observation was so accurate it hurt. Alara found herself moving to a cushioned bench beneath the portrait. And after a moment, Corvin joined her, maintaining that careful distance. "Always careful. We were engaged for 2 years," she began. The words coming slowly at first, then faster. "Everyone said we were well matched. He was a second son with decent prospects. I was a merchant's daughter with a reasonable dowry. Nothing romantic, but comfortable, safe. But he met Margaret, Lady Margaret Hayworth, at a house party. Beautiful, titled, wealthy. Everything I wasn't." The old bitterness still tasted sharp. "He didn't even have the decency to tell me privately. He announced the end of our engagement at a dinner party, in front of 40 people, and proposed to Margaret the same night." Corvin's expression darkened. "And no one objected? Why would they? He was trading up. I was the foolish one for thinking." She stopped, swallowing hard. "For thinking I mattered to him. That I was more than just a convenient arrangement until something better came along. You were never the foolish one, Miss Thorne. He was the coward." Corvin's voice carried absolute conviction. "A man of honor ends things privately, kindly. What he did was calculated cruelty, designed to ensure you couldn't recover socially. He destroyed your reputation to elevation his own, and that makes him contemptible. Tears burned behind Elara's eyes, not from the memory, but from being heard. From having someone name the cruelty for what it was, instead of suggesting she should simply accept it gracefully. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For listening. For not telling me it's for the best, or that I'll find someone else, or any of the other useless platitudes people offered. Corvin studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, a crack in the marble, revealing warmth beneath. You're welcome, he said. Then softer, and for what it's worth, Miss Thorne, I think you matter very much. Chapter 5. The Valyrian Ultimatum. Attack came at midnight on the 7th day. Elara woke to the sound of shattering glass and Isolde's voice screaming something in that ancient language she didn't understand. She lunged from bed, heart hammering, and ran to the window, then immediately wished she hadn't. The grounds were crawling with figures in crimson and gold, dozens of them, moving with that unnatural vampire speed, surrounding the manor like a scarlet tide. At their center stood the copper-haired woman from the forest, and even from this distance, Elara could see her smile. The door burst open. Corvin strode in, his usual composure replaced by something cold and deadly, away from the window. Now, Elara obeyed, stumbling backward as he moved past her and looked down at the scene below. His jaw tightened. House Valyrian has lost patience, he said, his voice like winter steel. They're demanding immediate surrender of the sanctuary claim, or they'll consider it an act of war. Can they do that? Just attack your home? They're not attacking, not yet. This is a show of force, a demonstration that they have the numbers to make war costly. He turned from the window, and the fear in his eyes, actual fear, made her stomach drop. But if we don't respond carefully, it will become an attack. Isolde appeared in the doorway, her silver eyes blazing. They've brought 30 fighters, brother. We have 12, counting the newly turned. This isn't a negotiation, it's a siege. Then we negotiate from behind walls. Corvin moved toward Elara, and she saw he wore weapons now, a sword at his hip that looked older than countries. And something else, a dagger with a blade that seemed to drink the light. Miss Thorne, I need you to stay in this room. Lock the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone except me or Isolde. What are you going to do? What's required? He paused at the threshold. There are protocols for these situations. House Valyrian will send an emissary to state their terms. I'll hear them, reject what must be rejected, and hopefully buy us time for the council to intervene. And if the council doesn't intervene? The look he gave her held centuries of bitter experience. Then we fight, and some of us die, and the night courts descend into chaos. Which is precisely what House Valyrian wants, an excuse to seize Corvin territories while claiming justified response to sanctuary law violations. He left before she could respond. Isolde following with one last warning glance at Elara. The door closed, and Elara stood frozen in the center of the room, listening to the sounds of the household mobilizing, running footsteps, shouted orders, the ring of steel being drawn. She should stay here, should lock the door and hide like he'd instructed. But Lisette's portrait flashed through her mind, another woman caught in House Valyrian's machinations, another pawn sacrificed on their political chessboard. And Corvin's words, you raised your chin and demanded they show themselves rather than cowering. Elara grabbed her cloak and slipped into the corridor. The manor had transformed into a fortress. Servants rushed past carrying weapons and supplies, while vampires she'd never seen before took positions at windows and doorways. The air itself felt charged, electric with violence held barely in check. She made her way to the main entrance hall, staying in the shadows, and positioned herself behind a pillar where she could see without being seen. Corvin stood at the center of the hall, Isolde at his right hand, and 6 other vampires arrayed behind them. He looked every inch the ancient lord, now powerful, dangerous, absolutely in command. The massive doors stood open, and framed in the entrance was the copper-haired woman, flanked by 2 male vampires who radiated controlled menace. Lady Serafini, Corvin said, his voice carrying through the hall. You bring an army to my door. I trust there's adequate reason. The reason stands behind you, Lord Corvin. Serafini's smile was all teeth. 7 days you've sheltered a human who violated our territorial laws. 7 days we've waited patiently for you to see sense. Our patience is exhausted. The girl violated no law. She was ignorant of night court boundaries. There's precedent for sanctuary in such cases. Precedent from treaties written when humans were considered equals rather than resources. Serafini took a step forward. and every vampire in Corvin's guard tensed. Times have changed, Lord. The Treaty of Shadows is ancient history. House Valyrian operates under modern interpretation that serves House Valyrian's expansion. You mean, careful. Lord, your sister's fate should have taught you about challenging our interests. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 20 degrees. Corvin's hand moved to his sword hilt, and Alara saw genuine murder in his eyes. Do not, he said, each word razor sharp, speak of Lisette. You have no right to her name after what you did. We executed a criminal according to council law. Serafini's expression held mock sympathy. If you disagreed with the verdict, you should have argued harder. But you've always been principled for your own good, haven't you? Too concerned with honor and protocol, when what matters is power. Power without honor is tyranny, and honor without power is suicide, she gestured. And the vampires behind her spread out, a clear threat. Here are our terms. Surrender the girl for blood debt processing. Publicly acknowledge House Valyrian's territorial authority, and we withdraw peacefully. Refuse, and we take the manor by force. You're 12 against our 30. How many of your people are you willing to sacrifice for one insignificant human? Silence stretched like pulled wire. Alara's heart hammered so hard she was certain every vampire in the room could hear it. This was her fault, her ignorance, her presence, her existence creating this crisis. She stepped out from behind the pillar. I'll go with you. Every head turned. Corvin's expression shifted from shock to fury in an instant. Miss Thorne, return to your room immediately. No, Alara walked forward, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. I won't let people die because I took the wrong road. If blood debt will end this, then I'll face it. Serafini's laugh echoed through the hall, delighted and cruel. How noble. Lord Corvin, it seems your little pet has more sense than you do. Corvin moved between Alara and the Valyrian emissary so fast she didn't see him cross the space. She doesn't understand what she's offering. Then explain it to her. Serafini's smile widened. Tell her about blood debt, about what 3 nights of service to House Valyrian actually means. Chapter 6. Blood Oaths and Broken Seals. Corvin's voice was a lethal whisper, meant only for Alara's ears. Blood debt means they own you. 3 nights of service feeding, menial labor, or worse, depending on their whim. They can drain you to the edge of death and revive you, drain you again, use your blood to seal contracts or strengthen their house magic. You'd be property, Miss Thorne, chattel, and there's no guarantee they'd honor the 3-night limit once they had you. Alara's knees threatened to buckle, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. And if I don't go, how many die? That's not your burden to carry. It became my burden the moment I stepped into their territory. She glanced past him at Serafini's triumphant expression. I won't have deaths on my conscience because you were trying to protect me. Your conscience? Corvin's laugh was bitter. What about mine, Miss Thorne? Do you think I could live with handing you over to the same house that murdered my sister? The raw pain in his voice stopped her. This wasn't just about politics or law, this was personal, a wound that had never healed. Before she could respond, Isolde's voice cut through the tension. There is another option. Everyone turned. Isolde stood with her arms crossed, her silver eyes calculating. House law allows for substitution in blood debt cases. If another of equal or greater standing offers themselves in the debtor's place, the debt transfers. Serafini's smile dimmed. You can't be suggesting. I'm suggesting that if Lord Corvin wishes to prevent bloodshed while maintaining his principles, he could invoke substitution right. Isolde's gaze moved to her brother. Offer yourself for 3 nights of service to House Valyrian in exchange for the girl's freedom and the withdrawal of their claim. The hall erupted. Corvin's vampires shouted protests, while Serafini's delegation murmured with surprised interest. Alara's stomach twisted with horror. No, she said firmly. Absolutely not. I won't let him. You have no say in this, Corvin said, still not looking away from his sister. Isolde, you know what you're proposing. 3 nights in House Valyrian's custody after what they did to Lisette is politically brilliant. Isolde moved closer, her voice dropping. They want to humiliate you, brother, not kill you. You're too powerful, too well connected. But 3 nights of a great house lord in their service? The prestige alone would satisfy Serafini's ambitions. And you'd be bound by oath they couldn't harm you permanently without violating substitution law, which would bring the entire council down on them. She's right, Serafini said, her tone thoughtful. Now, Lord Corvin in our service for 3 nights. House Valyrian would gain considerable status. And substitution right is absolute once offered and accepted. It cannot be revoked. Corvin finally turned to face the Valyrian emissary. And Alara saw the calculation behind his eyes. The same strategic mind that had survived centuries of night court politics. If I invoke substitution, he said carefully, the girl goes free. Completely free, no further claims on her, no restrictions, no delayed blood debts. And House Valyrian withdraws from Corvin lands immediately. Agreed. Serafini's eyes gleamed. 3 nights of service in exchange for the humans' complete freedom and our peaceful withdrawal. Do you accept these terms? Alara grabbed Corvin's arm before he could respond. Please don't do this. Not for me. I'm not worth your worth exactly as much as any life under my protection. He looked down at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. This is my choice, Miss Thorne. Let me make it. But they'll hurt you. Use you. You said yourself I said they'd hurt you. I can survive 3 nights of humiliation and pain. You might not. His hand covered hers where it gripped his arm, ice cold and steady. Trust me, please. The word please from a vampire lord who commanded rather than asked, who'd lived through centuries and owed her nothing, shattered something in Alar's chest. I accept the terms, Corvin said, turning back to Serafini. I invoke substitution right under ancient law. 3 nights of my service for Alara Thorne's freedom and House Valyrian's withdrawal. Serafini's smile could have lit the hall. Witnessed and accepted. The substitution is binding. What happened next seemed to occur in ritual, ancient, formal, terrible. Serafini produced a silver blade and drew it across her palm, blood welling dark and viscous. Corvin did the same, and they clasped hands, their blood mingling as both spoke words in that old language that made the air itself vibrate. Alara felt the magic seal, a pressure against her skin like the world had been rewritten. When they released hands, a mark glowed briefly on Corvin's wrist, crimson and gold. House Valyrian's colors burned into his flesh. The bond is sealed, Serafini announced. Lord Corvin will present himself at House Valyrian at sunset tomorrow. Any attempt to break the oath will result in immediate forfeiture of all Corvin holdings and the extinction of his bloodline. Extinction. Not just death, complete erasure of everyone tied to him by blood or turning. The stakes made Alara's head spin. Tomorrow at sunset, Corvin agreed. Now honor your end. The girl is free, and you withdraw. Serafini gestured, and her vampires began backing toward the doors. Oh, she's free. But Lord Corvin, her smile turned vicious. Do remember to eat well before you come. You'll need your strength. My house has been planning your visit for years. Then they were gone, melting into the darkness beyond the doors, leaving only the echo of Serafini's laughter and the crimson gold mark on Corvin's wrist. The moment the doors closed, Corvin's vampires erupted into argument. Isolde was shouting about council representatives, someone else about breaking the bond, but Alara couldn't hear any of it over the roaring in her ears. He'd sold himself into 3 nights of torture for her. A stranger, a human he'd known for a week. Corvin caught her eye across the chaos, and the look he gave her was steady, certain, as though this was the only choice he could have made. As though she was worth saving. Even at this cost, Alara had spent 2 years being told she wasn't enough, and now someone thought she was worth everything. Chapter 7. The night before the household didn't sleep. That night, Alara watched from the library windows as Corvin's people prepared sharpening weapons they couldn't use, drafting messages to council members who wouldn't arrive in time, arguing strategies that all ended the same way. Their lord walking into House Valyrian's hands at sunset. She'd tried to join the planning, to offer help, anything. Isolde had taken one look at her and said, the best thing you can do right now is stay out of the way, not cruel, just honest. What could a human governess offer in vampire warfare? So Alara sat alone with the undying candles and tried not to think about what 3 nights in House Valyrian meant. Tried not to imagine Corvin always so controlled, so powerful, brought low by creatures who'd murdered his sister for political gain. Tried not to feel the crushing weight of being worth saving. You're thinking too loudly. Alara jumped. Corvin stood in the library doorway, having appeared with that unnerving silence. He looked exhausted, or what passed for exhaustion in a vampire. Something brittle around his eyes, his usual composure fraying at the edges. I didn't hear you approach. Most don't. He moved into the room. Not toward her, but toward the fireplace, staring into flames that couldn't warm him. You should be resting. Dawn isn't far off. I can't sleep knowing what happens at sunset. Nothing happens at sunset. I present myself to House Valerian. I serve for 3 nights as contracted. And then I return home. He said it so matter-of-factly, as though discussing a tedious business trip rather than ritualized torture. Don't, Alar stood, anger suddenly blazing through her guilt. Don't pretend this is nothing. I heard what Isolde said after they left about how House Valerian treats their debtors, about the humiliation rituals, about her voice broke, about how they'll make you kneel and beg and bleed just to prove they can. Yes, they will. Still that infuriating calm. It will be unpleasant. I'll survive. You don't know that. They killed Lisette. They executed Lisette under council law. Different situation entirely. Finally, he turned to face her, and the carefully maintained composure cracked just enough for her to see the fear beneath. Substitution right has protections. They can humiliate me, drain me, use my blood for their rituals, but they cannot cause permanent harm without triggering blood feud. And House Valerian isn't strong enough to survive a feud with House Corvin, not yet, so you'll just endure it. 3 nights of them using you like property. I've endured worse. The flatness in his voice suggested that was true, and Ilara didn't want to imagine what could be worse than this. What matters is that you're free. House Valerian can never claim you now. The substitution right sealed that permanently. I don't want to be free at your expense. The words burst out before she could stop them. I didn't ask you to sacrifice yourself for me. I didn't ask for any of this. No, you didn't. He moved closer, and something in his expression had gentled. You asked for a governess position and got vampires instead. You asked for a quiet escape from your pain and got caught in a political war. None of this is fair, Miss Thorne. But fair stopped mattering the moment you crossed into Night Court territory. Then tell me why. She closed the distance between them, desperate for him to understand. Why would you do this? I'm nobody. A ruined governess running from scandal. You owe me nothing. I owe you the same thing I'd owe any innocent caught in our games. His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek the first time he'd voluntarily touched her since the forest. His skin was ice cold, but the gesture was so careful, so human, it made her throat tighten. But you're right, that's not all of it. Then what? You remind me that some things are still worth protecting. His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and his eyes held centuries of weariness. I've lived through empires rising and falling, Miss Thorne. I've watched humanity create wonders and horrors in equal measure. After 500 years, it's easy to become numb to see mortals as brief flickers, inconsequential sparks in the endless dark. That's what you think I am. A spark? No, the word was fierce. You're proof that those sparks matter. That courage and dignity aren't diminished by mortality. When I saw you in that forest, chin raised, demanding monsters show themselves, he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I remembered why I chose to protect humans rather than prey on them. You reminded me who I wanted to be. Tears burned behind Alar's eyes. I'm not brave. I'm terrified all the time. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's fear with purpose. His hand dropped from her face, but he didn't step away. You're afraid, but you offered yourself to House Valerian anyway. That's not nothing, Miss Thorne. That's extraordinary. They stood close enough that Alara could have counted his eyelashes, could have mapped the impossible perfection of his face, close enough to feel the absolute absence of warmth, of breath, of life, and yet closer to feeling truly seen than she'd ever been with Thomas or anyone in London society. I wish I could come with you, she whispered. I wish I could help. You already have. He stepped back, putting careful distance between them again. Promise me something? Anything. Don't try to rescue me. I know you'll get some idea about following to House Valerian, about bargaining or intervening. Don't. His expression turned grave. If you cross into their territory again, substitution right won't save you. You'll be theirs, and I'll be powerless to help. Promise me you'll stay here, safe, until I return. Every instinct screamed against it. But she'd already cost him 3 nights of torment. She couldn't risk making it permanent. I promise. Thank you. He moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Thorne? Alara? Her name on his lips sent warmth through her chest. Yes? When I return. He seemed to struggle with whatever he wanted to say. When I return, there are things I'd like to tell you. About Lisette, about why I really invoke sanctuary, about he stopped. Just wait for me. I will. He left then, disappearing into the shadows as dawn approached. And Alara stood alone in the library, heart aching, and realized with crystal clarity that somewhere between the forest and this moment, She'd started caring about the vampire lord far more than was safe, far more than was wise, far more than she could survive losing. Chapter 8. The siege of Corvain left at sunset, and the house became a tomb. Ilara spent the first night pacing her room, jumping at every sound, expecting news that never came. Isolde appeared once, her silver eyes hollow, to inform her that Corvin had arrived safely at House Valyrian and the substitution rite had begun. She offered no other details, and Ilara didn't ask, couldn't bear to imagine what begun meant. The second night was worse. The silence pressed down like physical weight, and the servants moved through the halls with funeral expressions. Ilara tried to read, to sleep, to do anything except think about Corvin kneeling before Serafini, about his blood being used for rituals, about the humiliation he was enduring because she'd been foolish enough to travel the wrong road. On the third night, just after midnight, the screaming started. Ilara bolted upright in bed as the sound of shattering glass echoed through the manor. Shouts, crashes, the distinctive ring of steel meeting steel. She grabbed her cloak and ran into the corridor directly into chaos. Vampires in crimson and gold poured through broken windows and breached doorways, moving with terrifying speed. House Valyrian. But they weren't supposed to be here. The substitution rite guaranteed withdrawal, guaranteed peace, unless they'd been lying from the start. Isolde, Ilara screamed, ducking as a Valyrian vampire lunged past her, locked in combat with one of Corvin's guards. East Wing, you fool. Isolde's voice came from somewhere below. Get to the warded rooms. Ilara ran, heart hammering, as the sounds of battle echoed behind her. She'd almost reached the East Wing when a figure in crimson stepped into her path. It was one of the males who'd flanked Serafini, tall, dark-haired, with eyes like chips of obsidian. He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who'd cornered prey. The little human. Serafini will be pleased, she said, you'd be here, unprotected, while Lord Corvin entertains us elsewhere. The full horror of it clicked into place. The substitution rite hadn't been about honor or territorial disputes. It had been a trap. Get Corvin away from his stronghold, leave his house vulnerable, and attack while he was bound by oath not to interfere. You planned this, Ilara breathed. All of it, of course. Did you think Serafini actually cared about your little trespass? He moved closer, and Ilara backed against the wall. This was always about destroying House Corvin, the lord in our custody, his home seized, his people scattered. By dawn, House Valyrian will control the entire northern territory. Corvin will kill you for this. Corvin is currently chained in our blood chamber, too drained to stand, let alone fight. His smile widened. And you, little spark, you'll be the final message. We'll leave your body in his bed, a reminder of what happens when someone opposes House Valyrian. He lunged. Ilara threw herself sideways, pure instinct, and his hand caught her cloak instead of her throat. Fabric tore. She stumbled, fell, scrambled backward on the marble floor as he stalked toward her with leisurely menace. Run if you like. It only makes it more. A sword burst through his chest. The vampire looked down in shock at the blade protruding from his sternum, then collapsed, revealing Isolde behind him, her face spattered with blood and her silver eyes blazing with rage. I said East Wing, she snarled, hauling Ilara to her feet. Can you follow simple instructions, or must I carry you like a child? I'm sorry, I save it. Isolde dragged her down the corridor, moving with inhuman speed. House Valyrian broke the substitution oath. They attacked while my brother is still in their custody. Do you understand what that means? That they lied? That they've triggered blood feud? Every great house, every vampire bound by council law, is now honor-bound to support House Corvin in retaliation. She shoved Ilara into a room lined with silver symbols and slammed the door. These wards will hold against anyone except me. Stay here, and don't open this door until I return. What about Corvin? If he's chained, if they're draining him, I'm sending riders to every allied house within 100 miles. Someone will reach him before dawn. But doubt flickered in Isolde's eyes. Now stay here, stay quiet, and pray to whatever gods humans still believe in. She was gone before Ilara could respond, the door clicking shut with terrible finality. Ilara stood in the center of the warded room, listening to the sounds of battle rage through the manor. Crashes, screams, the smell of smoke beginning to curl under the door. House Corvin was falling, and Corvin himself was trapped, miles away, helpless. Because of her, because he'd invoked substitution to save her worthless life, she thought of his words from that last night. When I return, there are things I'd like to tell you. Except he might never return. Might die chained in House Valyrian's Blood chamber. While his home burned and his people were slaughtered, Elara had promised to stay safe, to wait for him, but some promises were meant to be broken. She studied the silver symbols on the walls, traced their patterns with shaking fingers. Protective wards, designed to keep vampires out, but she wasn't a vampire. And the window high, narrow, but large enough for a human woman wasn't warded at all. The drop to the ground was 20 feet, maybe more. She could break bones, could die from the fall, but staying here meant watching House Corvin fall while Corvin suffered alone. And Elara Thorne had spent 2 years being someone who stayed quiet, who accepted her lot, who let others decide her worth. She was done being that person. She grabbed bed sheets and began tying them together, her hands moving with desperate efficiency. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. Inside, her heartbeat was a war drum, steady and fierce. Corvin had said she was extraordinary, that her courage mattered. Time to prove him right. She tied the makeshift rope to the bed frame, tested it once, then climbed through the window into the blood moon night. The manor burned behind her, and somewhere, miles away, the man who'd saved her was dying. Elara began to climb down, jaw set, hands steady. Despite her terror, she was coming for him, and heaven help House Valyrian when she arrived. Chapter 9. Blood and Reckoning. The journey to House Valyrian should have been impossible. Elara had no horse, no weapons, no idea which direction to travel, except the vague notion that Valyrian territory lay west. She had torn silk slippers, a ruined cloak, and sheer desperate determination. What she also had and didn't discover until she'd run a mile through the forest was a shadow following her. You're either incredibly brave or catastrophically stupid. Elara spun, nearly losing her footing. A vampire emerged from the darkness, young-looking, with auburn hair and Corvin's same winter-pale complexion. One of his house guards. She remembered seeing him in the entrance hall. "Are you going to stop me?" she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Stop you from committing suicide by Valyrian?" He tilted his head, considering. "Lady Isolde said to keep you in the warded room. She didn't say what to do if you climbed out the window like a deranged cat. Then let me go." "Can't do that either. Lord Corvin would have my head if I let his." He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "If I let you die stupidly." He moved closer, and Elara saw he carried a sword and a crossbow. "But I can escort you. Make your death slightly less stupid anyway. What's your name?" "Marcus. I've served House Corvin for 43 years. His expression turned grim. "Lord Corvin turned me after my village was destroyed by raiders. Gave me strength, purpose, a family. So if there's even a small chance you can help him, I'll take it." Hope flared in Alar's chest. "You know where House Valyrian is. 3 miles west, through the old cemetery. They've occupied the Blackwood estate since they seized it from House Theron 50 years ago." Marcus gestured for her to follow. "But understand, we'll likely die. House Valyrian has 30 fighters, and their estate is fortified. We're 1 vampire and 1 human who can't even run properly in those ridiculous shoes. Then we'll have to be clever instead of strong." Something like respect flickered in Marcus's eyes. "Lord Corvin chose well when he protected you. Come on, and take these." He handed her a dagger. "Silver blade. Won't kill a vampire permanently, but it'll hurt like hell and slow them down." They ran through the forest, Marcus setting a pace Elara could barely maintain. Her lungs burned, her feet bled through her ruined slippers, but she didn't slow, couldn't slow. Corvin was suffering, and every second mattered. The Blackwood estate rose from the darkness like a nightmare. Given architecture, all black stone and Gothic spires, windows glowing with sickly yellow light. Even from a distance, Elara could feel something wrong about it, a spiritual rot that made her skin crawl. Marcus pulled her down behind a crumbling mausoleum at the cemetery's edge. "Blood chamber will be in the lowest level. That's where they conduct rituals, where they'd keep a captive lord. How do we get in?" "We don't. I go in through the servants' entrance. They won't expect an attack tonight. Not with most of our forces pinned at the manor. You stay here and know." Elara gripped the dagger tighter. "I'm coming with you. You'll be a liability. I'll be unexpected. They're hunting for vampires. They won't notice 1 human." She met his gaze steadily. "And if Corvin is as drained as that vampire said, he'll need blood to recover." "My blood?" Marcus stared at her. "You'd let him feed from you? If it saves his life?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Elara marveled at how much had changed. A week ago, The thought of a vampire feeding from her would have been unthinkable. Now it seemed like the only logical solution. He'll resist, Marcus warned. Lord Corvin has strict protocols about feeding. He won't want to take from you, especially not under duress. Then we'll make him. Alara stood, brushing dirt from her ruined dress. Show me the servants' entrance. They moved like ghosts through the cemetery, using tombstones and crypts for cover. The servants' entrance was a narrow door set into the estate's foundation. Guarded by a single bored-looking vampire in Valyrian crimson, Marcus dispatched him with brutal efficiency, one hand over the guard's mouth, the other driving a stake through his heart. The vampire crumbled to ash, and they slipped inside before anyone noticed. The corridors were stone and shadow, lit by torches that burned with a natural green flame. They could hear voices above laughter, celebration. House Valyrian was toasting their victory, while House Corvin burned, rage, white-hot and purifying. Flooded through Alara's veins, Marcus led them down spiraling stairs that seemed to descend into the earth's bones. The air grew colder, and Alara began to smell it, blood, old and fresh, the copper tang mixing with something darker, something that spoke of suffering and ritual magic. They reached the blood chamber's door, iron-banded oak covered in symbols that hurt to look at. No guards. Why would there be? Corvin was chained, drained, helpless. Marcus tested the door. Locked. But vampire strength made quick work of the iron bar. What they found inside made Alara's stomach turn. The chamber was circular, the walls inscribed with glowing crimson runes. At the center hung Corvin, arms chained above his head, shirt torn away, his pale skin marked with ritual cuts that still bled sluggishly. His head hung forward, dark hair obscuring his face. And he was so still, Alara's heart seized with terror that they were too late. Then he moved just barely. A shudder of breath and relief nearly dropped her to her knees. Lord Corvin, Marcus whispered. Moving forward, Corvin's head lifted fractionally. And Alara saw his eyes, usually winter storm gray, now nearly black with blood starvation. He focused on Marcus with visible effort. Get out, he rasped. Trap. This is trap. The door slammed shut behind them. Serafini's laughter echoed through the chamber, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Did you really think it would be this easy? Oh, Lord Corvin, your little human came to rescue you. How touching. How perfectly, tragically predictable. Alara spun, dagger raised, as vampires materialized from the shadows. 6 of them, maybe more, all wearing Serafini's cruel smile. Now then, Serafini purred, stepping forward. Let's discuss what happens when humans break their promises and lords learn that protection has consequences. Chapter 10. Dawnbreak. Angelara had spent 2 years learning to be small, to be invisible, to accept what others decided she deserved. She was done with that. You want consequences? Alara stepped forward, positioning herself between the Valyrian vampires and Corvin's chained form. Then let's discuss the consequences of breaking substitution right. Blood feud. Wasn't it? Every great house honor bound to support House Corvin? Serafini's smile didn't waver. Blood feud requires witnesses. And unfortunately, everyone who might testify will be dead by dawn. Not everyone. Alara's hand tightened on the dagger. Marcus, how many riders did a soul descend? 12, Marcus said, understanding dawning in his eyes. To every allied house within 100 miles. And how long ago? 2 hours. They'll have reached at least 3 houses by now. Serafini's expression flickered just for a moment, uncertainty cracking her confidence. Because if allied houses knew about the attack, knew about the broken oath, then House Valyrian's gambit had already failed. They'd be branded oath-breakers, facing not just House Corvin, but the entire Night Council's wrath. You're bluffing, Serafini hissed. Am I? Alara forced herself to sound calmer than she felt. You said it yourself, I'm predictable. Which means Lady Isolde knew I'd come for him. Knew I'd break my promise. So she planned for it. The riders weren't just calling for help, they were documenting your oath-breaking. Every allied house now has testimony about your attack during substitution right. It was pure improvisation, built on hope and Isolde's strategic mind. But Serafini's expression suggested it had struck true. Kill them, Serafini snarled. Kill them all, and we'll deal with the houses later. The Valyrian vampires lunged. Marcus met the first with his sword, moving with desperate speed. Alara slashed wildly with her dagger as another vampire came for her. The blade caught his arm, and he screamed, the silver burning through flesh. She didn't wait to see the damage. just ran toward Corvin's chain form. His eyes tracked her movement, and she saw horror in them. No, Elara, run. Shut up and trust me. She reached up to the chain's iron, locked with mechanisms she couldn't break. But the stone wall they were anchored to was old, crumbling. She wedged the dagger into the mortar and pried, desperation lending her strength she didn't know she possessed. Behind her, Marcus was losing. She could hear it in his labored breathing. The wet sound of claws tearing flesh. The mortar cracked. Come on. Come on, Elara threw her full weight against the chain anchor, and it gave way with a screech of protesting metal. Corvin collapsed forward, and she caught him or tried to. He was solid muscle and ancient bone, far too heavy for her, but she managed to break his fall enough that he didn't crack his skull on the stone floor. Can you stand? She gasped. Barely. His voice was thread-thin, ravaged. Too drained. Need blood. Can't fight. Then take mine. Elara pulled him upright against the wall, tilted her head to expose her throat. Now, before they kill us both.